Today I'm here to do a long-form review of my new favorite book of 2025 in terms of new release horror, and this is one that I almost didn't read. I have looked at this author's work before, I've sampled them, and quite frankly his other premises just didn't really grab my attention, so at first I didn't even request this one for review, and thankfully through circumstances I ended up having a friend recommend this book, did get a chance to check it out, and wow, this is one of the most powerful books I've read all year, possibly a new all-time favorite, definitely a new all-time favorite. I'm just gonna say that right now. And I originally actually had this book as part of a horror reading wrap-up that I just filmed, and I just finished editing that video, and quite frankly, I felt like a 2-minute soundbite telling you about this book and why you should read it did not do the book justice, and so I cut it out of that video. If you watch that video, you probably know there's a little bit of wonky editing and cuts in there, that's why. And I'm sitting down once again, same day, to try to tell you why you should read this book, why I love it so much. I'm worried I'm gonna get a little bit personal here, so bear with me. It sounds like you guys are open to me sharing a little bit more, but if you want to read an emotionally impactful story that completely blew my mind and has just hit me in the gut, one that I loved and immediately wanted to reread as soon as I was finished, and I just want to read it over and over again because I am just in love with this book, I got you covered. Let's get started and talk about this. So the book in question is When the Wolf Comes Home by Cassidy, and again, this is an author who I've looked at before, no knock to them if someone tags them in this video. Essentially, I just haven't really been drawn to some of their other topics. I know they did a bit of a retelling of Carrie by Stephen King, which I talked about is not my favorite of his stories, and so I just really haven't had the push to pick up his books compared to others. However, a friend of mine who really enjoys his books wanted to read this book, and I ended up planning a buddy read with them and then completely dropping them on the buddy read because I picked up this book on a lark and could not put it down, and so I just had such a powerful experience reading this one. The basic premise is the fact that we follow this young actress who finds a boy hiding in her bushes. You find out, and this is all in the first setup, it's all in the first chapter of how this all gets going, that he is hiding from his abusive father, and so she begins to help him, and the father ends up coming after them and they go on the run. However, this is a horror story, not strictly a piece of crime fiction, so as the story progresses you realize that there is more going on, there is more of a supernatural piece. Part of that is hinted at, you can tell by the title of the book, really will give you pieces of the monstrous nature of where this book proceeds to go. And I would argue that it's actually a fairly simple premise. If you are picking up this book thinking that it blew my mind in the way that it told a story that has never been told before, I don't want to make those expectations because I think, again, that other books have done things like this, but there's something about a book like this that does it so well. I often describe myself as a black-hearted reader, and this book really made me feel things. I often say I read to experience something, to process things, and that is exactly what I had with this book. Now, I read this book right after I put out a video talking about the books that define my life, and in that video I did share more than I usually do in my content. Usually I try to keep it really strict about the books, and I kind of started to share a little bit of my own personal story within that video there. You all seemed open to it, so forgive me if it feels like I'm oversharing here to share a little bit more, but if I were to remake that video today, this book would be in there now, because on the very same day I read this book, I also was going through some really deep, heavy processing, and I really shouldn't get into what that is on camera, but just know sometimes you read the right book at the right time and it's just really eerie how things click into place. And I really give credit to the author of just kind of walking me through a really, really tough day and actually making me feel okay when I was dealing with stuff that was just way over my level of what I expected to have on a random Saturday. And so anyway, with this book, I think what it does so well is obviously describing the relationship of parental abuse. So that very specific idea of you have a child and their parent. And what I like is that while certainly within this book it's focused on the monstrous nature of it, it also hints to the other side is the fact that this father is not always that person, and that he also is a father, that there is this other side to him, that he shifts from one personality to another. And I think that that is one of the most nefarious parts of this type of situation, is the fact that you have someone who is not always like that. It's very confusing. Arguably, I think with a lot of abuse cases, they would be so much easier for the victim if that person was always the same, but it's almost the additional pain of that back and forth, the good accompanied by the bad, and you never know what you're gonna get, that can make it so much harder to really break free. And certainly in a situation with a child, they're already very much under their thumb. And this is one that I think just captured that really well. And again, I recognize there's other horror books that have taken these type of concepts and then kind of turned it into something so much more, with something more supernatural. And I feel like in a lot of cases, doing that can make it feel cartoony or goofy, and that was not the case here. Instead, what we had is a story that again was very much about this young boy, and also the choice to have a lot of the story told from the other person's perspective and really looking in from afar. It's a book that for me really tells a story of growing up, coming of age. And often I say, for me, my favorite coming of age stories, and they're not the most enjoyable, let me clarify that favorite and enjoyable are not necessarily the same thing, but I really like the coming of age stories that come from the loss of innocence. It's something that I see in my own childhood, of really when you have those moments where all your foundations, everything you think you believe in, like just crumbles out from under you, and you realize the hollow situation that you're in and just things are not as they seem. And very much I relate to characters being forced to grow up too early because they're faced by things that are, again, very adult, very much things that they shouldn't have to deal with but do. And again, it's not a nice part of society. I recognize not everyone wants to see that. But when I talk about not wanting to ban books or not wanting to be so afraid to write bad things into books, is the fact that bad things happen to people. And I stand by the fact that people need to see themselves on the page, which again, I don't want to put myself exactly in this boy's shoes. I'm not trying to imply that per se, but there are pieces of this boy's story that are very eerie to me, and because of that, I find myself having just a really big emotional reaction to that, and that is what I think a book is doing right. Now, I do want to mention that if you are someone who does not necessarily have those same connections, those same triggers, I still think that this book can be very powerful to read. I still think there's a lot to get out of it because, again, sometimes we read to see ourselves in books, and sometimes we read to understand other people in books. And that's when I talk about reading diversely, I really mean it in a very holistic way of if this boy's reality is so foreign to your own, I think it's also important to read that, because even if it's not your reality, it's someone else's, and even someone else's childhood, even if they're adult today, and really understanding where they're coming from. And I think that that is just something that I really appreciated with this one. Again, I'm trying not to use the word enjoyed because that's really not the main point. This is a book that I picked up and actually went into very blindly. It has a fantastic start. If you are on the fence about this one, first off, again, huge content warnings. If you're just not interested in the topic, if it's triggering to you, all of that, skip ahead to a different book. I have plenty of other video recommendations that are always on my channel. But if you're interested in this book but not sure about if it's for you, I do recommend just download the ebook sample on whatever device, because for me, the book has an incredibly strong start. It really describes the emotional situation. The writing itself is great. I wouldn't necessarily call it literary in nature, but there's definitely thought to the fragmented, surreal experience of abuse that, again, works so well with the pairing of tying this into the supernatural within the story. Because I think, again, it comes down to the fact that you have the reality, but then we also make things surreal in our minds, and we also extrapolate things in order to cope, in order to deal with things. And so I think a book like this works for me because while I don't believe in a lot of the supernatural elements and monsters that exist in a lot of this fiction, there's also the level of you can treat this in a way as being, is it just psychological and so forth. And certainly the book plays into it being real, but I think there is always the wiggle room when you're playing around with, like, is this a psychological manifestation? Is this how it is perceived? And really, like, what is at the core of it? So I just adore this book. And again, I don't know if this warrants a full review, but it really gives me a chance to highlight a book at more length that I think a lot of people should be reading. I think it, again, is the reason I come back to the genre, is while I have plenty of hits and misses, not everything works for me. I have plenty of 3-star reviews and so forth. There are certain books that just make every other book I had to read in order to find this one absolutely worth my time because it got me here. And again, I just want to put this book in everyone's hands. I want everyone to be able to experience it. Again, unless it's like a trigger for you, everyone else should read it and really understand why some books are meant to be written, why some books need to be told, some stories. and very much recommend. It gave me slight vibes of something like The Nightmare Room by Chris Sorensen, a book that I used to recommend a lot on my channel. I just haven't talked about as recently, but if you are looking for something like that, this is probably the best copycat, but definitely one that leans way deeper into, again, some of the topics explored there. And if you are going to read this book, I definitely recommend going through all the way and reading the afterword by the author. It's something I can easily skip over if I'm moving on to a different book, but I really took the time to read through it, and I think it's a necessary part of the story because you can tell this book feels oh so personal that I found myself wondering how much was fiction, how much was fact, and the author does a good job of kind of drawing some lines and defining the fact that he still is a fiction writer and not treating this as a memoir. But there's very much the conversation around, again, that perhaps father-son experience and really that relationship we have with our parent, and not just in terms of abuse, but just the larger role of how that relationship defines who we are, how we think of ourselves, our own self-esteem, our own worth. So much of that comes back to our childhood, and especially that male role is such a key piece when you look at all of this psychological research and psychology that's been done around childhood development and how much of that comes from that father figure in your life. It's pretty profound, and I think that this author really does a great job of tying in some of the inspiration, the complications of where this book came from for him. And of course, like I said, it still goes in those fictional perspectives. So again, if you're looking for a book that is going to blow your mind in terms of being the most innovative, out of the box, never saw it coming type story, this is not it. It is not necessarily experimental. If anything, it certainly leans into certain tropes. It is fairly straightforward in terms of the narrative you will expect based off the premise I gave. It is not about some twist ending that is going to completely redefine everything within the book. But what it does so well. And again, I really feel like it's a kind of story where it demonstrates what I love so much about the horror genre and the ability for horror to be reflective of our own life. Again, while it often reflects out from more of a supernatural, fantastical perspective, really what horror does best in my mind is have us reflect on our human experience. Often when I talk about that social commentary in book, people often take that as a negative, but really, again, it's about looking at our society, what we value, what we do, and the things that we normalize in society, the things that we shy away from. And horror, in terms of fiction, often gives us that safe lens to talk about things that are otherwise too taboo to talk about in other situations, other books, in our personal lives, and really allows an author to explore something that otherwise we'd shy away from. And so I find it's always a safe way to look at something that if you read about it on the nose without those other elements that kind of make the story a little bit larger than life, sometimes would be too difficult to palate, too difficult to swallow. And so by doing this, again, it makes it something that you can read and digest and think about. And for me, it was just such a cathartic read. It was a book I needed at the time. And again, really is a book that defines my life forward. It's another stepping stone in there. And again, I don't want to overshare. I think YouTube and content creating in general is kind of a slippery slope to burying yourself on the internet too much. But just know that some books really just put a pin in certain moments of your life, and I was not expecting this pin to be dropped where it was, and I just can't stop thinking about this book. So needless to say, highly recommend it. Please go check it out if it's something that you're at all interested in. Check out the synopsis or premise or first chapter if you need to know more. Very much recognize it's not going to be for everyone, but again, I would love more people to pick it up. And if I almost skipped over this book, I suspect a lot of you have also passed it over. It is a decently popular book. It's by a decently popular author, by a major publisher, but there's still so much coming out that sometimes it can be hard to focus our attention. Which horror books are worth your time? If you're only going to read maybe 10 or 20 horror books this year, make sure in my mind that that is one of them. Easily my favorite book of the year so far. Maybe it'll change, but again, it's going to take something pretty special to knock it off that top spot. And I really hope that this video convinced you to try it for yourself. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know if you're planning on picking up this book based off of what I said about it, if you are curious and want to give it a try. And of course, if you've already read it, I would love to hear from you as well. Even if you disagree with me, that's totally okay as long as you can be respectful. I'd love for you to talk about it more in the comments. And just of course be mindful of spoilers. I'm expecting this video to be primarily watched by people who have not read the book, and I always want to make sure that my comments are a safe spot. So leave a whole bunch of warnings or spaces if you want to talk more in detail. But I really love this book. Hope you do too if you check it out. And again, thank you for entertaining my interest in doing a full long form review of this one. I don't do it a lot with my horror reading because often less is more when it comes to the genre, but I just had so much I wanted to say about it. I don't know if I had anything of substance, but I really had a strong emotional reaction and wanted to give a video that would really spotlight a book that in my mind is such an important read, such a powerful read, and I really hope you love it too. So thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all those good things if you think I deserved it, and hopefully I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.